The winter of 1877 in New York City was merciless. Snow piled against the brownstones of Fifth Avenue like frozen shrouds, and the gaslit streets of the Garment District emptied by 4 in the afternoon. But inside the narrow building at 42 Bleecker Street, something warm was always brewing. The establishment was known as Armitage & Son, Fine Perfumery. It was a respectable house, the kind where Gilded Age matrons sent their maids to purchase rosewater and lavender oils. The kind where theater actresses whispered about custom blends that could make a man remember you forever. The shop was run by Ezra Armitage, a blind perfumer celebrated across Manhattan for his gift. They said he could identify a woman's perfume from across a crowded ballroom. They said his nose was worth more than most men's eyes. Until the morning of January 14th, when a patrolman named Officer Timothy Halloran was summoned by the landlord. The shop had been closed for 3 days. No smoke from the chimney. No movement behind the frosted glass. When they forced the door, they found the laboratory immaculate. Every bottle labeled, every burner cold, every surface scrubbed to surgical cleanliness. But in the cellar they found the distillation chamber, and inside it, arranged in glass vials like a collection of rare wines, were 37 samples. Each one labeled with a name, a date, and a single word. Fear, grief, agony, ecstasy, despair. And in the center of the room, Ezra Armitage sat in his chair, his blind eyes open, his hands folded over a leather journal. On the first page, written in perfect braille, was a single sentence that Officer Halloran would never forget. I have finally distilled the one scent that cannot fade. The scent of a soul leaving the body. But before we unseal the archives on this case, leave your comment below. What country and city are you listening from? And what exact time of day or night does the darkness feel thickest where you are? Your answer helps us know just how far these stories are reaching. What you are about to hear comes from Case File 73-A, sealed by the New York Police Department in 1878 and declassified only in 1972 under the Freedom of Information Act. The documents include witness depositions, medical examiner reports, and a partial translation of Ezra Armitage's private journal, written entirely in Braille. The case was officially closed as a suicide driven by laudanum psychosis. But the evidence suggests something far more deliberate, something methodical. Ezra Armitage was not born blind. He lost his sight at the age of 23 during a chemical fire in his father's laboratory in 1862. His father, Thaddeus Armitage, had been a chemist for the Union Army during the Civil War, tasked with developing improved anesthetics for battlefield surgery. The fire killed Thaddeus and left Ezra in darkness, but it also awakened something else. According to his own journal, recovered from the cellar, Ezra claimed that the loss of sight had opened a second sense. He described it as a form of synesthesia, where emotions produced distinct olfactory signatures. Fear smelled of copper and burnt sugar. Grief carried the weight of wet wool and cold stone. Joy, he wrote, was fleeting, like citrus peel held too close to flame. For 15 years, Ezra Armitage used this gift to build his reputation. His perfumes were not mere fragrances. They were emotional landscapes bottled in cut glass. A widow in mourning could purchase a vial of remembrance, a blend that smelled of her late husband's favorite tobacco and the lilacs from their wedding. A young debutante could buy anticipation, a scent that made every man in the room feel as though she were about to tell him a secret. But by 1876, something had changed. His apprentice, a young man named Thomas Calloway, told police that Ezra had become obsessed with a new project. He called it the mapping of the mortal spectrum. He believed that human suffering produced the purest scents, and he intended to collect them all. The reason this case was buried for nearly a century lies in the names found in Ezra Armitage's client ledger. Among his patrons were some of the wealthiest families in New York: the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies. When Officer Halloran attempted to question several society matrons about their purchases, he was quietly reassigned to a precinct in Brooklyn within 48 hours. The district attorney, a man named Charles Whitmore, issued a statement claiming that Ezra Armitage had died of self-administered laudanum poisoning and that his journals were the ravings of a syphilitic mind. But Thomas Calloway, the apprentice, refused to stay silent. In a sworn deposition given to a private investigator hired by his own family, Thomas described what he had witnessed in the final 6 months of Ezra's life. He said that Ezra had begun to leave the shop at night, alone, despite his blindness. He would return before dawn with small glass vials, each one sealed with wax and labeled in Braille. Thomas was forbidden from touching them. But once, when Ezra had fallen asleep in his chair, Thomas had opened one. The scent, he said, was indescribable. It was not unpleasant. It was worse than unpleasant. It was intimate, like standing too close to a stranger's grief, like inhaling the exact moment a child realizes they are alone in the dark. Thomas sealed the vial and never touched another. But he began to notice a pattern. Every time Ezra returned with a new sample, the morning newspapers would report a death, a tenement fire in 5 Points, a factory accident in the meatpacking district, a suicide from the Brooklyn Bridge. The deaths were never unusual enough to raise suspicion. They were the kind of tragedies that filled the back pages of the New York Herald every day. But Ezra always had a new vial. Thomas confronted him once. He asked Ezra where he went at night. Ezra had smiled, his blind eyes fixed on nothing, and said, "I go where the pain is ripest. I go where people are letting go, and I collect what they leave behind." Thomas asked what he meant. Ezra leaned close and whispered, "The soul has a scent, Thomas, and it only blooms at the moment of death." Thomas Calloway's deposition ended abruptly on February 2nd, 1877. The private investigator, a former Pinkerton agent named Samuel Greaves, noted in his report that Thomas had failed to appear for their scheduled follow-up interview. Greaves went to Thomas's boarding house on Mulberry Street and found the door unlocked. Inside, the room was orderly. Too orderly. The bed was made with hospital corners. The wash basin was dry, and on the small writing desk sat a single glass vial, unlabeled, filled with a pale amber liquid. Greaves, against his better judgment, uncorked it. The scent hit him like a fist. He described it in his report as the smell of a scream that never left the throat. He sealed the vial immediately and placed it in his coat pocket. Thomas Calloway's body was found 3 days later in the East River, tangled in the pilings near the Fulton Fish Market. The coroner ruled it an accidental drowning, likely due to intoxication. But Greaves noted something in his private files. Thomas had been a member of the Temperance Society. He had never touched alcohol in his life. The vial Greaves had taken from Thomas's room was later examined by a chemist at Columbia College, a doctor named Nathaniel Hargrave. Hargrave's report, buried in the case file, is one of the most disturbing documents in the entire dossier. He wrote that the substance contained no recognizable chemical compounds. It was not plant-based. It was not mineral-based. It was organic, but not in any way he could classify. Under the microscope, he observed structures that resembled human cells, but they did not behave like any tissue he had studied. When exposed to heat, the liquid did not evaporate. It condensed, as though it were trying to return to a solid state. Hargrave concluded his report with a single line. "If I did not know better, I would say this substance was attempting to reconstruct itself." He refused to study it further. The vial was returned to police custody and subsequently disappeared. Greaves himself abandoned the investigation shortly after. In a letter to Thomas Calloway's mother, he wrote only, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I have seen enough." The Journal of Ezra Armitage, translated from Braille by a specialist at the New York Institute for the Blind, provides the most direct insight into his methods. The entries span from 1875 to the night of his death in January 1877. They are written with scientific precision, as though he were documenting a series of experiments rather than confessing to a series of crimes, because that is what they were. Crimes without victims that anyone would mourn. crimes that hid inside tragedies. In an entry dated March 9th, 1876, Ezra wrote, "I have confirmed my hypothesis. The human body releases a unique chemical signature at the moment of death. It is not the same as the smell of decay. That comes later. This is something else. It is the scent of severance. The moment the soul detaches from the flesh. I can smell it from 3 city blocks away if the wind is right. It calls to me like a bell." He described his process in meticulous detail. He would wait near hospitals, near tenement buildings, near the docks where industrial accidents were common. He carried a small leather satchel containing glass vials, cotton swabs, and a silver tool he called his extractor. He would arrive at the scene of a death within minutes, often before the police or the coroner. In the confusion, no one noticed the blind man kneeling beside the body, pressing a cloth to the victim's mouth, their neck, the hollow of their collarbone. He was collecting vapor, the final breath, the invisible residue of a life ending. But Ezra did not stop at passive collection. In an entry dated July 14th, 1876, he wrote, "I have discovered that certain deaths produce more potent samples than others. A man who dies in his sleep offers almost nothing. The scent is thin, diluted by peace. But a man who dies in terror or agony or rage, that man leaves behind a concentrated essence. I have begun to seek out these deaths deliberately, not to cause them. I am not a murderer, but to be present, to harvest what would otherwise be lost." Officer Halloran would later describe this entry as the turning point. Because 2 weeks after Ezra wrote those words, a series of unusual deaths began to occur in Lower Manhattan. Between late July and December of 1876, the New York City Coroner's Office recorded 14 deaths, classified as unexplained medical events. The victims had nothing in common. A seamstress in her 20s, a dock worker in his 40s, a retired school teacher, a child of 9 years old. They died in different neighborhoods, at different times, from different apparent causes: heart failure, sudden seizure, respiratory collapse. But Dr. Edwin Marsh, the chief medical examiner, noted a peculiar detail in his private correspondence. Each victim had been found with a faint chemical odor lingering on their skin, a scent he could not identify, sweet but not floral, warm but not spiced. He described it as the smell of something burning very slowly, from the inside out. Dr. Marsh attempted to analyze tissue samples from 3 of the bodies. He found trace amounts of an unidentified alkaloid compound, similar in structure to atropine or scopolamine, but far more complex. He theorized it could be a synthetic derivative, something engineered in a laboratory, but when he tried to trace its origin, he found nothing. No chemist in New York admitted to producing such a substance. No pharmacist had sold anything matching the description. The compound, if it existed, had no name, no source. Ezra Armitage's journal entries from this period reveal the truth. He had not merely been harvesting death, he had been cultivating it. In an entry dated August 23rd, he wrote, "I have developed a method to accelerate the release of the essence. A tincture derived from belladonna, henbane, and a mineral extract I purchased from a Chinese apothecary in Chinatown. When introduced into the bloodstream in microscopic amounts, it does not kill. It merely weakens the thread. It makes the soul easier to dislodge. The subject experiences what physicians call sudden death, but I know better. I am simply helping them let go." He described his selection process with chilling detachment. He chose individuals who were already suffering: the sick, the destitute, the hopeless. He believed he was performing a service. He wrote, "They were dying slowly, in misery. I gave them speed. I gave them purpose. Their pain was not wasted. It became part of something greater. It became art." But by November, even Ezra seemed to sense that something had shifted. His entries became erratic. On November 19th, 1876, Ezra wrote an entry that Officer Halloran would later describe as the confession of a man losing control. The handwriting in Braille was uneven, pressed too hard into the paper as though written in haste or panic. It read, "I made an error. The essence I collected last night was wrong. The subject did not die in fear or pain. She died in rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. I did not realize until I opened the vial in my laboratory that rage has teeth. It does not sit quietly in glass. It wants out." He described what happened next. The vial had shattered on its own without being touched. The scent filled the room instantly, thick and suffocating. Ezra, blind as he was, said he could feel it moving. Not as vapor, but as presence. It circled him. It pressed against his chest. It whispered in a voice that was not a voice, and then it left, through the window, into the city. 2 days later, a fire broke out in a tenement building on Hester Street. 7 people died. Witnesses reported that the fire had started on the 3rd floor, in an unoccupied room. There was no source, no candle, no lamp, no stove. The fire inspector filed a report stating probable cause as unknown ignition. But a woman who lived on the 2nd floor, a Polish immigrant named Ania Kowalski, told a different story to her priest. She said she had smelled something just before the fire began, a scent like burning hair and copper. And she had heard a sound, a voice that seemed to come from inside her own skull, whispering a single word over and over. Burn. Ezra's journal entry from that night is brief. "I have lost containment. The essence I released is no longer inert. It has memory, it has will. I do not know if I can recapture it. I do not know if I should try." This is the moment when Ezra Armitage's experiment ceased to be scientific and became something else. Something closer to summoning. He had believed he was preserving death, but he had been feeding it. And now, it was learning to act on its own. The final entries in Ezra Armitage's journal span only 3 weeks, from late December 1876 to January 13th, 1877. They document his realization of what he had truly created, not a collection of scents, not a library of human emotion, but something far worse. He had distilled human consciousness itself, and consciousness, once separated from the body, does not simply vanish. It lingers, it hungers, it seeks a way back. On December 28th, Ezra wrote, "I have been a fool. I believed I was capturing the moment of death, but I was capturing the moment after. The instant when the self realizes it no longer has a vessel. That realization, that existential terror, is what I have been bottling. I have created a collection of trapped awareness. 37 souls, suspended in glass, unable to move forward, unable to return. And they know I am the one who bound them." He described the phenomena that had begun to occur in his shop. Footsteps in empty rooms, the sound of breathing where no one stood, the sensation of being watched from every corner simultaneously. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He remained in his laboratory, attempting to reverse what he had done. He tried to release the essences back into the air, but they would not disperse. They circled the room like invisible predators, waiting. On January 7th, Ezra made his final attempt at redemption. He wrote, "There is only one way to undo this. I must provide them with a vessel, a single willing body that can contain all 37. I am the only candidate. I am the architect of their prison. It is only just that I become their means of escape." What Officer Halloran found in the cellar suggests that Ezra succeeded. The 37 vials were empty. Shattered glass littered the floor, and Ezra sat in his chair, his body intact, his blind eyes open. But when Dr. Marsh performed the autopsy, he found something impossible. Ezra Armitage's heart had stopped. His lungs had ceased, but his body temperature was 11 degrees higher than it should have been, as though something inside him was still burning. And in his mouth, wedged between his teeth, was a folded piece of paper, written in Braille. It read, "They are all here now, and they are so very angry." The New York Police Department sealed the building at 42 Bleecker Street on January 16, 1877. The official reason given was structural instability and potential chemical contamination. But the truth, buried in departmental memos, was far simpler. Officers refused to enter. 3 patrolmen who had assisted in the initial investigation requested immediate transfers. One, a veteran named Patrick Donnelly, submitted his resignation letter the same day. In it, he wrote only, "I will not go back into that place. I felt them watching. I heard them breathing. Whatever is in that cellar is not dead." The building remained sealed for 6 months. During that time, neighbors reported disturbances. The sound of glass breaking in the middle of the night, the smell of burning sugar and copper drifting through the alley. A street vendor claimed he saw lights moving behind the frosted windows, even though the gas lines had been shut off. A priest from the nearby St. Anthony of Padua church was asked to perform a blessing. He entered the building with holy water and a crucifix. He emerged 12 minutes later, pale and trembling, and refused to speak about what he had experienced. He left New York 2 weeks later and never returned. In July of 1877, the city attempted to auction the property. No buyers came forward. The building was eventually purchased by a real estate speculator named Bernard Locke, who planned to demolish it and construct a modern commercial building. His workers began tearing down the upper floors in August. On the 3rd day of demolition, the foreman reported that several men had become violently ill while working in the cellar. They described sudden headaches, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. One worker, a German immigrant named Otto Kessler, collapsed and had to be carried out. He claimed he had seen a man standing in the corner of the cellar. A blind man, dressed in black, who turned toward him and smiled. The demolition was halted immediately. Bernard Locke sold the property at a loss to the city, which filled the cellar with concrete and bricked up the entrances. The building was left standing, empty and abandoned. By 1880, it had become a local legend. Children dared each other to touch the door. Vagrants avoided it entirely. The building at 42 Bleecker Street stood vacant until 1923, when it was finally torn down to make way for a textile warehouse. Workers reported no unusual incidents during the demolition, though the concrete foundation of the old cellar was never fully excavated. It remains buried beneath the current structure to this day. But the legend of Ezra Armitage did not die with the building. In 1947, a perfumer named Vincent DeMarco opened a small shop 3 blocks away on McDougal Street. Within 6 months, he claimed to have created a signature scent unlike anything on the market. He called it Severance. It became wildly popular among a small circle of Manhattan socialites who described it as hauntingly beautiful. But DeMarco's success was short-lived. In 1948, he suffered a complete mental breakdown and was committed to the Rockland Psychiatric Center. In his admission interview, he told doctors that he had found an old journal hidden in the walls of his shop during renovations. A journal written in Braille. He said he had taught himself to read it, and that the formulas inside had taught him something he could never unlearn. He died in the asylum 6 years later, still insisting that the scents he created were not his own, that something had been guiding his hands. The journal he claimed to have found was never recovered, but researchers at the New York Historical Society uncovered something equally disturbing in 1979. A private letter dated 1876, written by Ezra Armitage to a colleague in Paris. In it, Ezra described his ultimate goal. He wrote, "I do not seek to preserve death. I seek to transcend it. If consciousness can be distilled, it can be transferred. If it can be transferred, it can be made eternal. I am not building a collection. I am building a vessel. And when it is complete, I will no longer need this failing body. I will live in the essence itself, invisible, imperishable, aware." The letter was never sent. It was found sealed in Ezra's desk, along with a single glass vial. Empty. But when the archivist opened the drawer, she reported smelling something faint, something sweet and acrid. something that reminded her of a scream she had once heard as a child. The case file of Ezra Armitage remains sealed in the New York Police Department archives, classified under historical cold cases with no living witnesses. Requests to access the full dossier, including the untranslated portions of his Braille journal, have been denied 3 times since 2005. The official reason given is protection of descendant privacy, though Ezra had no known heirs. In 2012, a graduate student at NYU writing a thesis on Victorian-era pseudosciences attempted to locate the original vials recovered from 42 Bleecker Street. She traced them through evidence logs to a storage facility in Queens, decommissioned in 1968. The facility records indicated that the items in question were destroyed in a fire. Cause of ignition unknown, but there are still stories. Perfumers in Greenwich Village, the ones who have been there long enough to remember the old tales, will sometimes speak of the Armitage effect. They describe it as a phenomenon where a fragrance will suddenly shift in character, becoming darker, heavier, more intimate than intended, as though something else has been added, something that was not in the formula. When this happens, they say, the only solution is to destroy the entire batch, to pour it out and start again. Because once a scent has been touched by the Armitage effect, it will never sit right on human skin. It will cling, it will follow, it will remember, and on certain winter nights, when the wind cuts through Bleecker Street the way it did in 1877, people still report the same smell. Faint but unmistakable, sweet and acrid, copper and burnt sugar, the scent of something that refuses to fade, the scent of 37 souls still searching for a way out.